Questions or comments? Mr. Wobson.
Rob, on this, there's several questions around this, and I can't remember. Did you make a comment about when you needed to have this passed, or is this, what's your timeline on this?
Sooner than later would be great. Tonight would be great.
Okay.
As the letter explains, that there was a crossover in communication. As you recall, we extended 1 year because of COVID with the health department. We wanted to make sure the committee was able to actually walk through what changes, pricing, et cetera. We were able to accomplish that. It went to a vote. An amendment to the existing contract happened in March. The contract was delivered, final version, to our office, and it was signed. So that's explained.
So we're good through 22.
Correct.
So, and you're asking us for, how many years is our commitment?
5.
So you're asking us for a 5-year commitment with the first 3 years is known.
Yes.
And then we have some kind of a basic idea of what the next 2 years will be. Is that correct?
The anticipation is every 3 years that you would go up 5% based on cost and expenses. However, their goal is through funding, through grants and what other opportunities they have for funding, to be self-sustaining. So if the opportunity is that they do not need the contribution that is given through the city or the other contributors, townships and villages, that could be a lesser number, but we don't know that.
We are looking at 3 years at 5%, so an additional 15%.
5% for 3-year windows. It doesn't go up 5%.
3 1 years.
It does not go up 5% every year for 3 years. It's 5% for 3 years.
For one time.
Correct.
How was the distribution arrived at? The 42?
Based on population and services provided to the population.
And you said that this number stayed the same from the last contract.
Yeah.
But didn't we lose population in the census? So I would think, though, that this would have adjusted because we actually lost people. We lost 2,000, 3,000 people in the census this year.
It is based on population, but it's also the services. They look at the services that are provided to the respective populations, and they quantify that by it's 57.5%. Said at 57.5% is
right, versus
how they
42,
break it out
yeah.
compared to the services that are because of the population in the villages and townships compared to the services provided to the city citizens.
Okay, so you're saying that even though we lost population in the city, that the county did too.
I'm not suggesting that or saying that. I'm saying they came up with this percentage based on looking at the historical.
Okay, my question would be then, did we check their numbers?
Yes.
You're comfortable.
We sat down with Kareem, we walked through the data,
Okay.
and yes.
Okay. All right. I was just surprised that this didn't adjust somehow since it would seem to me that people have moved out of the city and into the county, that somehow the county would start to pick up more of this. That would be my anticipation given the census data. And I don't understand where we're getting into this conversation about services if it's based on population. I don't care if you touch anybody in the city, it's based on the population of people in the city. Does that make sense? And I'm not trying to be confrontational, I'm just trying to understand how we're dividing this expense, which is significant.
The mayor has a comment.
Okay, sorry, Rob, thank you.
No.
So I would say overall, when we're looking at, obviously we have a little bit different demands on the health department because of, for example, let's take our zoning regulations. We work with them if there's a raw sewage complaint. We work with them on some of these other things that aren't typically kind of higher demand items from the county overall. And so I think when we were looking at this, negotiating the contract early on with DAC through the merger, et cetera, overall, the minute amount of population change, I think the overall workload related is very proportionate. So I understand what you're saying, that there's been a minimal shift in population from within the city corporation, but I would say that in conversations with the villages, with the townships, with the Board of Health, that we all felt that the percentage of breakdown of cost was still appropriate for the services and the kind of distribution of services within the county.
So if we say no, what's going to happen at that point?
Yeah, so we would go back and discuss it. As the letter states, I kind of messed up because I thought when we did the extension, we had the legislation showing it. So sewed up, I signed it. And the auditor thankfully caught it and said, hey, did you have the legislation? I was like, oh, well, I thought I did, but obviously I didn't. So my apologies. So that's why we're coming to you. So we did negotiate. All of those other entities have signed off on it. As Rob mentioned, it has a cap on the increase, which very reasonable 5% over 3-year maximum 5% increase within the 2-year kind of extension option. The other item that he touched on but didn't really dig into that we added into this new contract is that if they don't, their cost justification that they provide, if they are under cost, then our amount proportionately also decreases, right? So one thing I'm always a big fan of is, okay, you have a cap on your max, but we also want to reap the benefits if you're managing it better, if you get outside funding, and we can see a decrease as well.
But Mayor, you said this is like a 2 or 3 with a 2-year option, but it's really not. It's a 5-year agreement.
Correct.
We're stuck for 5 years. It's just a matter of how much money we're going to pay.
Correct.
Okay, so our commitment is for 5 more years.
Correct.
Extended for the year. But then, the way I read this, it says that in the first 3 years of the agreement that we spent this $366,000, which exceeded what we thought it was going to be for 5 years. Is that what this says?
No.
Okay.
No, I think I don't have that letter directly in front of me. I didn't pull it out of the packet. I think that's pertaining to the future costs that cannot exceed. That's it. I know that they're planning to come in here soon. I know a couple people had questions on the mobile health unit. So I know they're planning to do a presentation to you all soon on that, on their measures. And I know they recently hired a PA, a physician assistant, I believe, to get that up to the full staff. So this, ideally, this would be passed tonight because of my snafu, but certainly understand that take time to review it. We'd be happy to go through. If anyone wants to sit down and review the agreement, we can certainly do that. And if you have significant concerns, I'll take one like an adult and go back and talk to the group to renegotiate it. But I would say that I'm very proud of the agreement. They have did a good job. Rob did a great job in working with the DAC and the villages to come up with what I believe is a very fair agreement.
But obviously, there's kind of a formula breakdown. How did we arrive? So in other words, were these figures kind of directed by the state at the state level in terms of services, population?
No, that was really when they were doing the health department merger. It was looked at on, okay, what's the total cost between the two? What services are being provided? Who's currently doing it? What is the population? Going back to that breakdown of services, are there staff that are providing services solely to the city? So I think it was just looking at the overall operation and then trusting the judgment of their staff to say, what is the overall kind of expenditures related to that, while also then keeping in mind population.
So I appreciate everybody's questions. I had similar to Jeff, but my first question was going to be, did council review the contract? Did this go to a committee to get reviewed beforehand? And if it didn't, I think it's appropriate that it should. I was on council during the time, many of us were, when the health department merger took place. I know there's a lot of pieces to the pie of where their funding comes from. For instance, vaccinations, they get a lot of reimbursements because they still run things through insurances and stuff. So this number is pretty high. You mentioned sewage, as we're having more issues with that. But I would say septic tanks have become a larger job for the health department to be managing and keeping track of out in the county as well. So I would like to see it go to council so we can see the contract, understand it. Maybe it's 3 years instead of a total of 5, or maybe it's a lot more of the discussion. I just haven't seen that contract. I would like to see it. So
it's an administrative function. Be happy to, as I stated before, sit down and go over it with anyone, send out a copy of it. It's pretty standard language from the previous agreement.
See the breakdown of all of the funding that's coming into the health department in the different pots, to see, where things have changed and why they need the increase or how it's validated. I appreciate that it's an administrative position, but council has to approve those funds at the end of the day. So if council doesn't want to have a committee on it, I would like to just, I guess, get with you and get those details, so.